Heard, who many of you have seen on my show before. The second half of the show will include retired Supreme Court Judge Ralph Beisner, who is from Dutchess County, and that is where he sat on the bench. Also, I'm honored to have Assemblyman David Sidikman, who represents Nassau County, and he has come from Albany today to tape this show. Thank you, everyone, for joining me, and I would like to first ask Randy Dickinson to tell me a little bit about the Fathers' Rights Association and how long you've been around and some of your goals.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. First of all, I'd like to express appreciation for the program, Joanne, and your willingness to have us on here to express some of the issues. The Fathers' Rights Association is a not-for-profit organization, public education and information organization that's been around for about 18 years now. It is dedicated to the advocacy of family-related issues and promotes the relationship or the continuing relationship between fathers and their children, irrespective of their family circumstances. We believe that the best parent is both parents, and we work and advocate actively at the social level, but also at the legislative level, to try to bring about the social and legal changes necessary to make sure that children and their fathers are not inadvertently or arbitrarily separated.
See, I'd like to, one of the things I do want to point out is when I did lobby with your group in Albany last month, I was not the only woman. There were a few female members of your organization.
Actually, yeah, that's true. In the Capital District area alone, approximately 20% of our initial contacts come from women.
Okay. So
and about 6% of our chapter membership is made up of women. And our issues are actually family issues, and which is indicated by the fact that so many women nationwide actually are directly impacted by the problems that men and fathers more specifically experience in the state supreme and family court processes. And our national affiliate, I should put in a plug for them, is the American Coalition for Fathers and Children.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to just read you a quote that I came across, and it is a quote from a New Jersey Municipal Court Judge, Richard Russell, and he said this to his colleagues during a training seminar 8 years ago. Quote, "Your job is not to become concerned about the constitutional rights of the man that you're violating. Throw him out on the street, give him the clothes on his back, and tell him, see you around. We don't have to worry about their rights." That seems pretty extreme. I mean, you know, most people's instinct would be, well, maybe it's quoted out of context, but many of the stories that I heard the day I lobbied in Albany with the fathers, seems like right on target. Can you maybe explain about the Book of the Dead, which what happened was one of the fathers, who's a member of your organization, sent me a letter from a gentleman who killed himself and wrote a letter to the judge before as a suicide note about not being able to see his children. But maybe you can help me out here.
Let's back up just a second. I think there are two parts of your question here to comment on a quote such as this. This particular judge is not the only justice in the family court system who has made similar comments. In fact, I think you've got on your sheet there some of the others. One retired Supreme Court judge right here in the state of New York, Brian Lindsay, once commented that there is no system devised by mankind that is calculated to separate or to rip apart, I think was the term he used, so bitterly husband and wife or father, mother, and children than our present family court system. I would certainly tend to agree with that. And increasingly we're having more judges, honest judges, who are concerned about the integrity of the institution that they represent are coming forth. We have, for example, one in Albany County right now, Dennis Dugan, who has been very forthcoming in his admission regarding the bias that men, and more specifically fathers, experience in the family court and Supreme Court systems.
How does the bias occur? Because everyone throws this abandons about, well, there's bias and women get custody and all this. On what grounds do they think that it's best to keep the father out of the process? Obviously, people getting divorced, they don't get along, but many people, even though they don't get along, do get along regarding the children. And then the assumption you're telling me is that these judges and lawyers, they work to have one person as the winner of custody and the other person as the visitor.
Well, I think that's the fundamental issue here, is that these are issues that really have no place in a court of law. A court of law, by its very definition, is an adversarial forum. And in any adversarial forum, in any court system, you have to have a guilty party and a victim. You have to have somebody that did right or did wrong, and somebody that was the recipient of the wrong. So as soon as you go into the court process with a divorce or a separation or child custody issue, the court, again, and in fairness to the courts, their hands are somewhat tied in this regard. They are, as I say, an adversarial forum that is designed, has been from the beginning of, dating all the way back in Old English law, for the purpose of adjudicating disputes, and they're good in that function, and focusing on violations of codified law. They're terrible. They are an absolute abomination in terms of adjudicating or dealing with human relations.
Right, I agree. But we are living in America. We're not in, one of these. We're not in Afghanistan. So, what is really the alternative? In other words, should there be these issues? I mean, do you want to get the psychological community involved? I mean, my experience, and many people I know who've been on the show, has been more horrific with these shrinks, these so-called people appointed by the court to evaluate. Worse with those people than the lawyers and the judges. So what I'm saying is, yeah, I agree with you, it stinks. I've been there too. But what could possibly replace it? And maybe that's what David Sidikman will talk to.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we need to recognize is that we are dealing with human relationships here, and we also are dealing with a situation where the playing field must indeed be leveled. We hear, for example, in the state of New York and elsewhere around the country, an advocation of issues involving parental education and mediation through the divorce and child custody process. In the state of New York, however, we have a situation that's so lopsided that the analogy I use is someone sitting down to play cards, and when you walk in, they're going to give John here 51 cards, and they're going to give me 1 card, and we're going to sit down and we're going to negotiate, quote unquote. If I've got all the marbles and he has none, how are we going to play the game? How are we going to negotiate? So the playing field must be leveled. And one of the concepts, not only in theory, but also at the legislative level and now imposed upon the courts, that's actually sweeping the nation. So well in excess of 30 of the 50 states have implemented some element, some variation of a so-called shared parenting model, wherein when the parties go into the court, it's going to be assumed that if they were equally involved in the lives of their children and raising their children, that they will be when they come out. West Virginia last year, for example, passed one of the more powerful shared parenting bills, and basically what the court does when the parties enter is simply say, look, you guys are more familiar with your circumstances, your own schedules. You go out and work out a parenting plan and come back to us with that parenting plan. We'll put our stamp of approval on it, and everything will be, you'll be off and running. If you can't come back to us with a parenting plan, we'll simply split. The presumption is that the children will have equal access to both of their parents, and we'll split things right down the middle. David Sidikman has indeed introduced and has been the sponsor on the Assembly side of the legislature, a shared parenting bill for some 8 years now. I won't go into all the details of it. Certainly he'll be able to speak
Randy,
on
I understand that, but for someone, let's say like John Hurd, who has been a litigant for 13 years, his judge in Manhattan is Phyllis Gangle Jacob. Is so biased. Is so biased. So that even though the
Written up in New
mother,
York Magazine, Prejudice,
As a
group
man
of
who,
lawyers
you
went
know.
to the Judicial Committee about this judge in 1994. She even refused to appear before a Judicial Committee. She is characterized as biased, you know, beyond belief. They removed her, shuffled her.
so what good is the
She's been
sheriff
sitting on my
acting
case. She
on?
refuses to let go of my case. I moved 100 miles away. Didn't move away to get rid of her. A mother moved 100 miles away and sought for a change of jurisdiction, and she granted it. I seek a change of jurisdiction, and she criminalizes it. And what you're not talking about, what you're not getting at, is why do the courts criminalize fathers?
Because they can.
Because they have to. Because to support the divorce industry, to support the lawyers, to support these corrupt judges. Judges get kickbacks on child support awards. They are matched by the federal government in so they subsidize. These little communities, what's his name? He writes this wonderful thing about how each little courtroom is its own little fiefdom. You got Joe Taraka, you got Marianne Mizell, you got Vincent Bradley, you got all these crooks over there, and they write their own ticket. They write their own rules. You can go from one jurisdiction to another in a custody case, tell me if I'm wrong, and find that a mother who didn't vie to have her child immunized was relieved of custody as a bad parenting choice. In my instance, in front of Gangle Wad, I was incriminated for wanting my son immunized.
As I recall, her decision
Her decision read
how?
that since my son has not suffered any of the childhood diseases for which immunizations are provided, quote unquote, therefore he doesn't need immunizations because he has not suffered any of the diseases for which immunizations are provided.
This, if I
And
might,
that means that my son would actually have to contract polio before he got a polio shot. Now, I will bet you money that if Gangle Jacob watches this show, she will change the wording of that order. Because that's another thing, that men are going into court, ordering, transcripts. And one of the things that Stephen Baskerville writes about in this article that I have in my hand is that these guys, and they've documented it, that the transcripts are doctored, that wording is taken out. At one point, Gangle Jacob...
Stephen Baskerville is
just for people who are not going to...
He is a professor of political science at Howard University. He's a very outspoken and eloquent spokesperson.
He's actually been on television. They've actually allowed this guy, and they shout him down with all the viciousness of the deadbeat dad syndrome.
I might make a
Which
comment.
is another thing that should be dispelled. The deadbeat dad bureaucracy. You know, the idea that you can bureaucratize by virtue of a slogan the behavior of millions of American men is a kind of a racist thing to do, if you ask me. To lump every guy in there as a potentially deadbeat, because that's what you are when you go into their collection system. They need money to run their collection system, just like cops hiding in the bushes on the Taconic Parkway need to generate revenue so they can keep their engines burning all day and those V8s they ride around in. All right? These judges, to pay their salaries, to put money in their slush funds so they can get new carpeting for the courtroom, they need to stick it to guys. They're not going to stick it to women.
I think that what you just said
And so they need, what you have to understand fundamentally,
exactly. I mean, I think
they
it's a
need
close
to criminalize the
generalization.
father so that they can punish him, so that they can...
First of all, they have not criminalized all fathers. I know what you're saying.
Name
There's
one.
a lot of people. My ex-husband. But I think
Your
there are a
ex-husband
lot.
is like getting, you're the man in your family, okay? What happened to you is what happens to fathers. Let's look at it that way. What he got away with is what women get away with, characteristically. Not paying
Yeah,
out
but
in terms of what they really
bias?
earn.
Wasn't that the bias of the female
It's
judge in my case?
Bias is bias.
Okay, I had a woman
Let me-
judge. My woman judge.
Bias is against the law.
Okay, bias is against
Ask
the person.
Gerald Stern, who
That's a very
personally
good point.
doctors every complaint that sits on his desk. You
One of the
saw it.
things-
Read
let me-
that letter.
let me
where
interject.
he writes the letter saying that you asked him to do something. I asked him to do
But I
something
think
that I
there
didn't
are-
ask him to do.
Okay, I think there are judges who are trying to do the right thing.
Name
Let me
one.
Okay?
let me comment
I'm
on
going to
this.
say, I think they're attempting, I actually am
Joe
in court.
Taraka,
No,
Let me comment on that.
Marianne Mizell,
no,
Mary Work,
absolutely not. She was mine.
what's his name, Vincent Bradley?
I don't know his record.
Name one. Name a judge that's trying to do
Well,
the
I
right
would
thing.
like to tell you that the retired judge who's coming on my show.
What a
yesterday,
segue. What a great segue.
He,
Let's have him.
I really wouldn't have him here if I thought he didn't have the highest integrity. And
What's
I'm
the-
serious
let's talk
about that. He
What's
was
the
not my
judge-
judge,
all right, Judge
okay?
Paisal's a great
But
guy, okay, fine.
but I'm just saying
What
that I
about
think there
something
are
else?
some people, and I'm also in court
Joanne.
as we speak, and the hearing examiner I have is trying his best to be
Joanne,
fair.
That's great. Let's,
Let me, before we get,
So is it-
let me make a comment
Okay,
here for a
talk,
second.
you didn't
John,
answer my
what's the
question, the
Book
Book
of
of the Dead.
well, before
Not
I
the
get into
Tibetan
that,
Book of the Dead, but you were-
I have a very important statement to make, comment to both of your statements. First of all, John mentioned, I think what he was trying to describe was the inconsistency in
Yes.
the courts. And the way I describe it and have for a long, long time is that you can take two identical cases and put them before the same judge and you will get two separate rulings on it. Or you can take one case and put it before two judges and you'll get totally different rulings on those
Well,
cases.
didn't your lawyer
Which is-
tell you it
which
depends
is
on the judge?
bias,
Yeah.
which is corrupt.
And the
which is-
problem that we have here is we have,
You don't get
again,
two
we
different
do
readings
not
when you
have
break
a
the
level
speed limit.
playing field, which is one of the reasons that there are a number of things, there are a number of issues that need to be addressed at the legislative level. But shared parenting is the mechanism by which the courts are compelled to level the playing field. You will not be getting so many disparate rulings on similar cases from different judges throughout the system.
If
So
they
it's-
were required
if they-
to
if they-
assume shared parenting
Again-
as at the get-go.
Again,
Is
as
that
I said in
correct?
the beginning, in fairness to the courts, currently, there are no statutory guidelines, there are no protections for non-custodial parents, 93% of which in the state of New York are fathers. And as a result, fathers are, from the moment you walk into this adversarial forum, you are automatically stereotyped, stigmatized as the perpetrator, the guilty party, the wrongdoer. And as a result of that, why you end up immediately on the short end of the stick with no recourse. I think I experienced it personally. Everybody
I
that we
did too. They told lies about me.
There-
Well, the whole thing.
You're
But-
the guy.
I realize that, and there are always
I-
exceptions to the rule. The problem is that because of the stereotypes, one class of people, in this particular instance, and John alluded to it, the issues involving bias are so deeply entrenched,
It's
and
worse than-
the courts are the only thing they have to go to fall back on are case law.
Right.
And traditional biases, and that bias is defined by the so-called.
They don't have any reason to exist if they don't criminalize somebody. If they make this a level playing field, if they say you can see your son when you can see your son, well, first of all, what right do they have to tell you when time you can see your own child?
Yeah.
All right? So that's already criminalizing you. The criminalization of fathers is only by virtue of the lopsidedness in custody. It'd be just the same. You'd be criminalized as a mother if it was the other way around. If it's just the custodial, non-custodial.
I can put this-
Criminalizes the non-custodial.
I can put into perspective your
justification
comment
for their existence.
that you were in your particular case you were the one that was on the receiving end of this bias. If we go back, for example, to your, I know that both of you want to talk about this Book of the Dead and
They
this.
wanna
Yeah,
be
you're
suicide
avoiding the
issues.
question.
Yeah.
No, I want to get to it now because it somewhat addresses
Yeah.
your comment. Again, there are always going to be exceptions to the rule, but the issue of suicide among the male population for the father's rights and the so-called men's rights or men's issues movement, and it truly is developing into a nationwide, actually a worldwide movement, is something perhaps of a backlash. But the issue of suicide is very important to us because under normal circumstances, the proportion or the ratio of suicides, male to female, is 4-to-1. There are 4 times more men that commit suicide under normal circumstances than there are women. And a divorce, a separation/divorce, child custody proceeding, that number doubles to 8-to-1, and nobody's asking why. Why does the men's suicide rate go from 4-to-1 to 8-to-1, and it doesn't even move for women?
Why is there no Women's Rights Association?
So
Why is
here's
there no
my.
Mothers' Rights Association?
So
Because they don't need
Well,
one.
interestingly enough, there is one that a very small one that's beginning, I think, up in the upper
Well, when they
Midwest,
need
but-
one, boy, we'll know about
Yeah.
it.
But the issue, again, is a very sensitive issue. We have an individual that was with us, that was going to be with us this morning, who has been precluded from showing up on air and speaking publicly because of an incident that occurred beginning back, I believe, back in late January.
And he's from Columbia County,
Yes.
is that correct? And his
the
judge is?
The judge involved in his case was Judge Paul Chika.
Okay.
And who, by the way,
There's
is
another name to the list.
yeah, who by the
Paul
way,
Chika.
who by the way I understand
Idiot.
is up for election in 2 years, which may
Mhm.
explain, somewhat explain his reaction to, as I described the circumstances.
Paul, get a
It'll mean
life. Stop picking on fathers.
John,
Sorry.
Again,
stop picking on mothers.
Again, the issue of suicide is a very sensitive issue, and on New Year's Eve in Boonville, New York, we had a murder-suicide that involved a young fellow named Christopher Slauson, who took his wife's life and then turned the pistol on himself and took his own life. As it turned out, it was a dispute. It was the passions that were that developed over a bitter custody dispute, and I took the opportunity to sit down and write a very powerful and hard-hitting letter to the editor on that issue. And
What
in that,
paper?
well, what we normally will do a lot of times, what I did is I sent the letter out over my own signature to all the local papers in the Capital District area up there. But what we will typically do to get broader distribution of this type of material is we will contact people in the various areas around the state and ask them if they have any objection to sending the letter into their local papers. This particular individual had cooperated with us with this sort of thing in the past and agreed to do it this time. The problem, without him making the connection at this particular point, is that he had, this is an individual who, by the same judge, Judge Chika, had been separated from his children for 3 years. He hadn't seen his children for 3 years.
Was that done through an order of protection?
Through an
again?
order of
Yeah,
protection.
that's what they
Again,
do.
these orders of protection are being handed out like candy from the courts with no questions asked, no burden of proof, no accountability for perjury. And as a result of them, men are being evicted from their homes, their children are being abducted, their income's being extorted, their assets are being confiscated, and if they complain about it, just as in this particular case, and this is not entirely true in this case, they can actually be thrown in jail without ever having committed a crime and without the due process of a trial. This is going on, and I can understand John's passion here and his anger, because this is going on, we all feel it as well, but it's going on every day. It's happening right now in the state's family courts, even as we sit here. So in this particular case, this individual had been separated from his children for 3 years. He had been being a good little boy, which is exactly what the court puts you in a position where you have to demonstrate to them that you're going to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, to go to the anger management classes, the forensic psychological evaluations, the parenting classes. None of the mothers are asked to do this.
I love when they call you angry. It's like, if you weren't angry, then I would say you were psychologically disturbed.
Exactly. Here's
not
this,
to be angry.
to go back to my comment a moment
Well, all these
ago.
judges, they have
Let me
some
put it in
medical
perspective.
conflict.
Again, if you can have an order of protection issued against you with no questions asked, no burden of proof, and no accountability for perjury, it gets you evicted from your home. Your children are separated from you. Your income is extorted. Your assets are confiscated.
Garnished.
What would you expect a man to be?
Well, what
And then when you
happened to
when you
this
express
guy-
this anger, then you're penalized for it.
Well, what happened to this person in
Pleasantly
Columbia County?
surprised.
Well, in this
Because
particular
we have to wrap up.
yeah, in this particular case, what happened was we had sent it to this individual. At this time, he had gone through all this process, and he had submitted a petition to the court, to Judge Chika, to have his visitation with his kids reinstated. Without making the connection, he signs this letter for us, sends it into the Register Star and the Independent, and lo and behold, of the few papers across the state that published the letter, they decided to do it. His ex-wife sees it in the newspaper, runs to her attorney with it, and all of a sudden, they put a petition in before the judge, and now all of a sudden, the judge's big concern has never been the relationship between this man and his children. All he's been concerned about are domestic violence issues and order protections, and all of a sudden now the issue of reinstating this man's visitation is again bottom on the list of priorities, and all of a sudden this is being characterized as a veiled death threat This is a letter that I wrote.
The judge said his signing that letter
Right.
was a death
It
threat.
was a
Because-
death threat. The man was tried for it
That
on
he
the
was
20th.
going to try to commit suicide?
No, that he was going to, that he was going to, I guess.
Like Slauson?
Yeah,
You wrote it?
well, I don't know exactly.
Oh, because he was going to kill his wife first before he killed
I
himself.
guess so.
Well,
I guess
because
that's what was.
If you take the death, what's it called,
The Book of the Dead.
the Book of the Dead, and you chronicleize the loss of life to
The Book of
fathers,
the Dead quickly.
and then you don't publish it. If you only publish it in England, but you refuse to publish it here, and then you make comments like there's no relationship, when there is one, which is what these courts have done for long times, is to suppress any kind of statistical information or psychological clinical information about what's really going on.
Oh,
Here's a blatant instance of a man who wrote a letter, and they characterize it
as a death threat.
as a death threat, or
And it
in
had-
other words, impending bloodshed. If you
Yeah, but
if you
that
publish,
kind of
let me finish. If you
twisting-
publish the fact that
Let me,
bloodshed
there's some
is
important,
imminent
there's some
in the
important
loss of
points
a
that I
child.
need to get
Well,
out
you
here.
better hurry, 'cause
So,
we only have a
yeah,
minute
so let
left.
me get these out. One of the things
Make
that
a connection.
this man was facing 6 months in prison for a violation of his order of protection for having submitted a letter under his First Amendment rights to a local newspaper that I wrote. He
Yeah.
didn't even write the letter. And so when we got to court, we had contacted the press. The press was there. He threw them out. The representatives from the father's rights were there. He threw them out. And I was there to testify on his behalf. He was later asked by the press to speak to them. And when he spoke to the press, that so angered the judge that the judge drug him back into court the next day and held him was trying to hold him in contempt of court for speaking to the press. Now this
So,
is a
you
perfect
know,
example of the kind of this was
Well,
Judge.
the thing is
Oh,
that
but let me make a further comment here.
we have to
I
close.
recognize that.
unfortunately.
Real quickly, his attorney wrote a letter to the judge, Judge Chaika, referencing the First Amendment right to free speech issues here, and Judge Chaika wrote a letter back that said her arguments were meritless.
So you would think that he would just, well, Judge Chaika is up for election in November in Columbia County, and all of you out there who live in that section should,
Get
in that
rid of him.
district, should take this into consideration, or at least,
Then again, don't give him his pension. That's another thing these guys get for life.
anyway, thank you,
Lots of love.
gentlemen, for joining me today. It was
Thank you for
certainly
being here.
enlightening.
Thank you for
And,
having us
Always
here.
fun
I
to be
appreciate
here.
it. It's always fun. And of course, don't forget that this show is underwritten by J&P Publications, publishers of The Joy of Divorce. And you do have to have a sense of humor, or you might end up in the Book of the Dead. Thanks again for everybody for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Welcome to part 2 of the JOANNE Michaels Show, The Real Story. I am pleased to have with me the Assemblyman from Nassau County, David Sidikman. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Joanne.
He is sponsoring a shared parenting bill in the legislature, and this thing has been trying to get through for many years, and we're hoping that David will be successful with it this year. Also, my other guest is retired Supreme Court Judge Ralph Beisner from Dutchess County. And Ralph was a Republican, and David Sidikman is a Democrat.
You mean he's
So
no
we have-
longer a Republican?
Well, he still is, but when he sat. I mean, for all of those who say, you know, well, actually, I've had more Republicans on my show than I have had Democrats.
Doesn't make them bad people.
No, it does not. That is true. So tell us about this. There was quite a heated discussion in the first half of this show with John Hurd and Randall Dickinson from Father's Rights about the issues rolling around with this shared parenting. I have to tell you, as I did myself have shared parenting, even though I did not get along with my ex-husband particularly well, but I felt that it was the best thing for our son, and I really feel that a kid has two parents, and that's what needed to be. No matter what, we went the extra mile to try to come to agreement on issues involving him. I never understood, frankly, why this can't be the norm. I mean, my son lived 2 weeks with me, 2 weeks with him, and it somehow worked out.
Can I ask a question before we get going?
Yeah.
What is the difference between shared parenting and the concept of joint custody that's presently used by the...
Actually, there is a difference.
There is?
Yeah, and if I describe the bill, and it will indicate the difference. There are really two parts to the bill, and I've carried it for 8 years now. I feel like Don Quixote tilting the windmills, but I'm very determined to do this. The first thing it does, it creates a presumption in the court that the first option that the judge has is shared parenting. The first option.
Shared parenting meaning?
Meaning, joint decision-making for medical care, joint decision-making in education, joint decision-making in religion, and the other part is physical custody. Does not necessarily mean 50% of the year the child is with each parent. The second part of the bill, as was mentioned before in another state, requires a parenting plan. So you have to lay down your hatchets for the time necessary to create a parenting plan which will talk about physical custody. And physical custody could be anything that you agree to.
I see.
But it retains that decision-making. We have instances in cases where the father cannot have access to school records, cannot have access to medical records because they are refused that information without permission of the custodial parent, which is 93% women. When I took this crusade up,
And what
it was
made you,
because
you're married, well, what made you
I've
get
been
so
married for
involved?
45
Okay,
years
what
to the
made-
same woman.
A dinosaur. Here.
I am a dinosaur.
Okay, but
You have
what?
two dinosaurs.
I know, you are too, that's right. You have a-
Because it offends my sense of fairness.
Okay,
I've seen the pain. I've seen the statistics, and I don't want to bore everybody with statistics, but there is one suicide a month on Long Island, and there are suicides all over the state. We see that the children, you know what? I don't want to call it father's rights. I want to call it children's rights.
That's correct. That's, now you're...
Now we're
you're-
talking- we're on the
now
same
you're right.
track.
That's absolutely right. We should be dealing with the rights of the children here, not the father or the mother. This is not a gender issue. Although it may play out statistically one gender or another, but it's really the right of the child to be brought up in a nurturing environment by a mother and a father, regardless of whether or not that mother and father are getting a divorce, not living together. I mean, this is a speech that I gave for 18 years in court. It didn't matter that the parents weren't together anymore. What did matter was that parent and mother and father had participation in the life of that child, because the child is going to grow up to be an adult. And we're just creating a repetitive problem if we don't deal with allowing a child to have a mother and a father.
well, there's,
I agree with you
this is
100%.
100% correct, because I did have a guest on, just what you're saying. He was denied, or, you know, the son was denied access to the father. P.S. He's 18 years old. He hates his mother. And the father, he moved in with the father. He did poorly in school. He's so angry at his mother, and it backfired. So what I always say to these guys, like I had on earlier, The kids are 5 years old for a year. But then if a woman, and I've said this to women, don't do this to you because it's going to backfire on you.
That's right.
And that's what happens.
You end
and,
up with a dysfunctional teenager,
Right.
and ultimately a dysfunctional adult who comes back to live with you.
Exactly, and that's what this guy is doing.
We don't want that.
And better yet, this guy is in the position of having to defend women and say, well, not all women are like that. I mean, he's in a very precarious situation that he never expected.
If we could
Joanne?
take this level, we could take it off of the gender issue, I think.
I don't want to
this
talk about
concept-
gender, I want to talk
that's
about
right.
the
I think this
children.
whole concept would
Most
be much further.
incarcerated juveniles and men come from single-family homes. You have a large, high incidence of drug abuse, a high incidence of alcohol abuse, and you have a very, very high incidence of failure in school in the educational process.
And is it
We
any
have to
wonder-
protect these children. You know,
And it would save the taxpayers money, is what you're also saying.
would do that.
Ultimately, it will save the society a lot of aggravation, too. But what you're saying...
and my
is-
question to the system is, what are you afraid of?
Well, what is this Republican senator afraid of? I won't name him, that we were discussing before we went on air. He is not for this bill. You were saying he doesn't like the bill. Give me an example of what he doesn't like about it. I know it's
I don't want to talk to
Okay,
for
okay,
him
but what-
because I do have a Republican senator
That is sponsoring,
that is sponsoring and will sponsor
But what is the
bill.
opposition to it? The mechanics of getting this
The judicial
through.
system right now, being an experienced person in the judicial system, there are mechanisms that would permit the courts to function the way I presume this bill is indicating. Whether or not they do that, and you can see from the discussion earlier in the show that people come with their preconceptions and their own baggage and their own agenda into the system, both as litigants and as psychiatrists, psychologists, judges. Everybody carries their own system and their own value system into this thing.
The system has as its mantra the best interest of the child. Now, what could be better than the best interest of the
Yeah,
child?
but that's not very often how it plays out.
Yeah, where the Court of Appeals of the state of New York, in two separate cases, holds that it's in the best interest of the child to permit the custodial parent to take the child 500 miles away, and they decreed that's in the best interest of the child. This is nonsense. In the Bremen case, the Court of Appeals holds that joint custody is part of the law of the state of New York. But it only should be decreed when the parents are getting along together. Duh.
Yeah, why would they get divorced?
Why are they getting divorced?
Oh, no,
Yeah.
no, time out now. I've used joint custody in many situations.
You are
and I've seen-
unique.
And I've seen it, but I've told people going into it, if the mother and the father can't agree among themselves on the best interests of the child, what good is joint decision-making? How can I create a joint custody situation where the mother and father are fighting with each other? Is that the best
I'd like
interest
to
of
answer
the child?
that.
Yeah, because that's the big objection.
Yeah.
That really is.
I'd like to answer that. If the shared parenting bill was the law of the state of New York, everybody going into a divorce situation would know that.
And they'd be
The
forced to do it.
attorneys
Would
would
know it.
know that. They would know that before they got their decree, they would have to come up with a parenting plan and put aside their differences only for the sake of the children. I mean, they could hate each other. I don't care. But it's only for the sake of the children. I mean, I've got a folder here full of stuff. I've got letters from children. I've got letters from parents. I have letters from psychologists and psychiatrists. I have this book, which everybody should read. Sandy Braver, it's called Divorce Dad, Shattering the Myths, which I won't let you have because it's autographed. Where he talks about the myths that we have in our society about how bad fathers are after divorce. Let me ask you this. I know I'm monopolizing
So now you
here,
went
but
into
I'm...
the agenda thing.
No. Well, we are dealing with men and women, but for the children, if a man is a father on Tuesday and he gets his decree on Wednesday, now he's not a father anymore. Now he's a visitor. One more thing, and I'll turn it over to you. The man, America's hero, Rudolph Giuliani, who was Times Man of the Year, who was knighted by the Queen of England, is given his children to visit twice a month. It's not right.
First of all, Joanne,
But see, now-
Joanne,
yeah.
to put some balance into this, we can take many individual cases where an injustice on its face would have been done. But the vast majority of cases where situations are worked out and joint custody is agreed upon and the children grow up in the best situation possible in that circumstance, that in my view prevails. But there are, to sit here and say that this justice system is absolutely 100% functioning, that would be ludicrous. Can't say that.
But there are people who are biased, and it's human nature. When you're a judge and you just take a dislike to one of these guys or one of these women, look, my woman judge didn't like me. She investigated me as a child abuser. I went through the mill. I'm a journalist. That's why I'm here. I decided, hey, if this happened to me, it's happening all over the country, and then some. And my case was nothing compared to what some of these guys have been through, and women who have lost custody in Dutchess County, I might add.
I like
But
the
I
Assemblyman's
guess-
concept where it requires both parties before they go into court to create a plan that deals with the custody issue. We have it. The legislature has created that in the equitable distribution of the assets, where the attorneys have to come in with a plan.
Yeah, but
and
equitable's
present
not
it-
equal.
Present that's a whole
Yeah.
different show.
Right.
That was the other part of my life.
They would
right.
come in with an equitable distribution plan. So it forces, I agree with you.
And it takes
forces
away
the
their
lawyers
fees, because
and
it takes
people-
the lawyer's adversarial
Yeah.
nature
And
is diffused when it comes to
And if you
dealing
can't
with
do it on
custody.
your own, you go into mediation or conciliation.
I
and
think
So I
that's
think it
right.
would be a great thing. So why doesn't everybody jump on the bandwagon and get behind this bill? Because there are lawyers in the legislature and they make money on this. Don't you think that's part of it? The lawyers are making a lot of money.
There are very
Reasonable
strong
people can differ.
special interests
I agree.
against the bill. The matrimonial bar not being the least of them. Okay.
The matrimonial bar, there
Absolutely,
you
that's how
go.
they make their living.
Exactly. Well,
But
that's the
the
problem.
gay community's against the bill?
The gay community.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because, I suppose, I don't want to get into gender, they're against the bill.
Wait, I'm thinking of homosexual men came to mind, but you're thinking gay women, I mean
Yeah,
both?
yeah,
Gay women
yeah.
and gay men?
Gay women mostly, yeah. They're against the bill, okay?
Okay.
Now, let me give you,
I really don't see the logic of that, but
They could
but
consider-
it's there. And unfortunately, they're making the public policy of the state of New York in regard to the care of our children. New Jersey Court of Appeals, you would love this, I wish I would have brought a copy of the case with me, decreed joint custody of a child in the care of a lesbian couple, and I kid you not.
Right, I know.
You know
I
that
know
case?
a case
You know
going
that
through,
case?
actually, I know
No,
somebody.
it held, that's what the
But
court
I don't
held.
see why gay people should be any different than straight people in terms of the litigation. I mean, there's two people, in some cases they're both men or both women, or it's about control.
You know, we
That's what this
now
is
again,
about.
we've moved off of the best interest of the children. And we've
The
gotten
children
into
are used as
gender,
pawns.
or we've gotten sexual preference. Let's
Yeah, stay
focus
on
is
this.
the
It
best-
seems to me
The best thing
that
for the
it's about
children
control.
is to have access to two children where a father is not dragged into court because he called the child on a wrong day.
Right, exactly.
And I've got a case.
Exactly.
that shows
And
that.
that's what's going
To have
on.
access to the children, to be able to see them, to be able to get their school records, to be able to call them on the
Or
phone.
if the child wants to call, John Hurt's son has to call him on a particular night. He's not allowed to call him on other nights. I mean, this kind of stuff is beyond the pale. So that's what a shared parenting bill, you're saying, would eliminate that kind of...
Well,
Because
it's
you
not going
you
to eliminate-
remain a parent.
You're not going to take the
You're not a
discretion
visitor
away from the
anymore.
court. I mean, you're
No,
the bill is not
The
going
court-
to do
No, the
that.
court has a lot of power, because if there's a showing of unfitness for either side, then
But there's a
sole
precedent.
custody would be decreed.
You know, I think it's a reasonable approach to a very difficult problem in our
Thank you.
society. And we have to come to grips with it, because we're creating a generation of children that are growing up without the benefit of one parent.
Well, in a war zone.
in a war zone.
That's
true.
that's really.
And we do have to come to grips with that if we're going to avoid that kind of stress and conflict, both on the parents and the child.
But wasn't Helene Weinstein, who was in the Assembly, as I understood it, this bill has been languishing in her office for years, close to a decade.
Not exactly.
Okay, what
Because
happened with that?
in the legislature, you have to draft the bill.
Okay.
And then the bill goes to the Committee of Jurisdiction. So originally, when I drafted the bill, it went to the Judiciary Committee, of which Helene is the chairwoman. And I'm a member of that committee. And I saw that it wasn't going anyplace for a number of years. And I had a discussion with the chairman of the Children and Families Committee.
Isn't that Steve Solan?
No, that's in the Senate. That's
The
Roger.
Senate,
That's
okay.
Roger Green.
Okay.
And I said, how would you receive the bill? He says, well, we have some members here who would be in favor of the bill. Could I get a hearing on it? Yes. I moved it. I moved it from the Judiciary Committee to Children and Family Committee. And 5 years ago, we had 2 hearings. We had wonderful hearings.
That's a lot.
5 years ago.
5 years ago, and now I'm asking for new hearings. I debated.
So realistically-
I debated Lois Shapiro Cantor, former
Who should?
New York State president of the National Organization for Women. Oh, by the way.
She was against this bill?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Oh,
why
yes.
would the national organization, forgive me, because I like to consider myself, one of the people 30 years ago who was in the forefront of women's equality. Now, why would someone not want men's equality? It seems to me that...
Well, she was also an attorney, a matrimonial attorney.
Well, and arguably, if their statistics are correct, then it takes away a statistical advantage from women going into a court with virtually a presumption of being a better parent. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So they would oppose it.
Have
So-
you heard
so-
of
so
Karen?
women-
Have you heard of Karen DeCrow?
Yes.
She's
Mhm.
one of the founding mothers of the National Organization for Women.
Yeah.
She's now an attorney in Syracuse. She's with us.
She supports it.
Absolutely.
There's dissension in the women's community on this. Not all, not the organization, National Organization of Women is split on this,
Yes.
obviously.
Society is split on this.
Well, it's because it's rendering up control. If women cannot, quote unquote, control the lives of their children, some women are very wrapped up with that. And that would mean giving up control of decision. Now, that's what I have to tell you, I never was into, my thing was, I told my husband we decided to have a child, you're doing 50%, everything's 50%. So when I decided I wanted a divorce, he still was in this 50%. It seemed very logical to me. But most women do not feel that way. And I have to tell you, the proof is in the pudding. My son was president of his class on the school board. He's in college. He's doing very, very well. And all those forensic psychologists who looked at him couldn't get over how incredible. So what I'm saying is, in my case, this was something that worked, and maybe it needs to be done nationwide. But I think you're going to have a big fight.
It does work. It does work.
No, it worked for me. I can't, but I just think you have to give up. As Ralph Beisner said, you have to give up. People are going to have to, compromise. These women are going to have to say,
Talk to each other. I'm
Yeah.
looking for something. Yeah.
well,
Joint custody does work. It's the best solution to the problem. And the courts have the ability to do that now.
do you think the judges would be amenable to this? You sat on the bench, honestly. Now you're off, but do you think judges would be...
Absolutely. I think most judges, and I disagree with some of the hyperbole, obviously, in the first half of the show with regard to judges, but I think most judges are seeking a reasonable, fair solution to these matrimonial and custody situations.
I'm not sure of that. I don't believe that's the case because it's
she asked me my opinion and from my perspective, and
Well, then-
you're entitled to your
But that
opinion,
may
even
have
though
been
you're wrong.
your feeling, and your sensibility, but what about what you're saying? You think the judges...
I just want to bring to your attention that just recently, Journal of Family Psychology, coming out of the Maryland Department of Health, new study, new report on how well children adjust when they have joint custody, when there's shared parenting. Joint custody is another thing. I believe, with all the material that I have, which is a cabinet full, that it's the easy way out
Joint
for
custody.
a judge to decree for the mother. Because in 10% of the cases, first of all, in 10% of the cases where the father has enough resources to contest and to go to trial and to go through the whole judicial process, 73% of the time, the father will get custody.
Well, I've
There
said
is
that,
no-
and John heard claims, and he has said that because of the cases that go to trial, and I have said this statistic too, 7 out of 10 times, the cases that go to trial generally are women who are mentally unbalanced. In other words, those men are taking the children away from an alcoholic, from a drug addict, from somebody, the ones that finally get to that trial stage. So he's claiming that that's a skewed statistic. So I'm not quite, I mean,
All right.
I'm just
Well,
telling you that.
There is
Let's
no-
go back to the
there is
children.
no easy
To
way.
quote the
For a judge, for a
Yeah.
judge to sit on a case, there is no easy way out of a custody situation. Any conscientious, responsible judge, it has to deal again with the best interests of the children. There is no easy way. It's not easy to give custody to one parent or another. If you want my opinion, the easy way is to get the two parents to come to a reasonable resolution and get both of them active in the life, but even of the child. But even if I have to give custody to one parent or another, I insist that the non-custodial parent have an active participation in the life of that child, and that can be done. The law allows that to be done, and I believe I've never met a judge that doesn't do that, that isn't conscientious.
Well,
about
I've heard, I've been flooded with
Judge,
people.
you are unique, but
Well,
let me-
I like to think that too. I tell
okay.
my wife that.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
No, but
If this bill
It's
became the
not.
law of the state of New York, wouldn't it have made your life a lot easier in these cases where you had a mother and a father, where there was no disability on either one of them to decree a shared parenting, shared decision-making?
I don't know your bill well enough to say whether it would have made my life easier, but there is no, these are not easy situations, they're not easy solutions. Anything that would help us to resolve them better is good. You know, the legislature created, I heard a lot of controversy about these orders of protection, that
Right,
they're
right.
such an abuse. 4 years ago, the legislature created this order of protection
you mean that's a
situation.
new thing? Because,
It's-
wait,
it's a
7 years ago, I
it's
was
a
filed, they filed one
relatively
against
new
me.
thing.
And then I had to file one. My lawyer said, now we'll file one against
The
him.
prior-
So we had
the prior
we had them
law
against
allowed-
each other.
Allowed the jurisdictional court to issue an order of protection under, in other words, if a matrimonial was in front of a judge and he or she was dealing with it, they could issue an order of protection under the appropriate
But
circumstances.
now you could go to the police.
After an adversarial or a fact-finding hearing.
Where there was
Now you
reason.
can go
Now
to
you
the
can just-
police station.
right.
And
And
the police
just-
officer stands there and he says, well, the best thing is going to be this. I don't know the truth of this whole thing, but the best thing is to issue an order of protection, separate the parties. You go into
Where-
court and the judge is confronted with this
Yeah.
separation situation. And he's saying, wow, that police officer must have had some reason to do this. So maybe I should continue it. It's in the best interests of the mother and father. And so now the presumption has occurred that the separation is the better approach.
Right.
And that's a
That-
creation of the legislature.
Yeah,
That's
and
not
that's
a
been
judicial
abused,
creation.
and
I-
that, thank you for
Oh.
clarifying that, because that's been abused tremendously. I mean, I got home from taking my kid to school, there were 2 cops in the kitchen, and he's going, arrest her. I was like,
You know, very
and luckily,
often,
I didn't
we
get
know
the...
not what we do.
I know, and that's the nature of a democracy,
That's
the
right.
legislative process. I don't fall.
You never know how it's going to work out.
But again, if we could keep our focus on the best interests of the
I
children,
agree with you.
maybe we could
I
get to
agree
some
with you.
solution.
But that's been
And
forgotten.
All
neglected, you know.
all the studies show, all the psychiatrists tell us, all the sociologists and the social workers tell us that the children are better off when they have full access to both parents.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
I know that just from being a human being and watching human dynamics. Children that grow up to become young adults, if they have the input of both a mother and father and the love of that mother and father, they're going to have a much better opportunity to be a functioning adult in our society.
And because it's very, very difficult when people have to go to different towns. I lived 2 miles away from my ex-husband. My son spent 2 weeks with me, 2 weeks, and then in the middle there was a night, overnight at the other parent's house. But we live 2 miles away. There are a lot of situations where people are forced to move. They work for corporations. It's a problem, and I think that more people today, the younger generation, people young, are more, they won't take the transfer because they want to stay closer to their family. I mean, a lot of these issues, a lot of times have changed. I hope this bill, what do you think, we have to wrap up, but what do you think the chances, honestly, of this thing passing? I understand there's a hearing coming up. What is the timing on
As
it?
Adlai Stevenson said in the United Nations, I will stay there till hell freezes over.
Well, you're
And
up
I'm
for
gonna-
re-election in
and I'm-
November, so I hope.
I'm going to get this done. This bill, this law is going to be my legacy to the law of the state of New York.
Well, you'll make a lot of gentlemen very happy, a lot of people very happy. I hope that's
Legacies are important.
Yes, they are.
Well, anyway, gentlemen, I really appreciate both of you, the judiciary, Ralph Beisner, and the legislative end of things here, David Sidikman, for coming to inform the citizenry. I mean, a lot of complaints are that people like you don't take time to talk to the populace like us.
And again, I'd
So-
like to point out that there is a restraint on a sitting judge to make comment in this sort of a forum on cases that are pending before.
But now you're retired.
And I have a certain liberty
Yeah.
now that I did not have as a sitting judge.
Well, we'll expect you to come back, Ralph. I'll expect you to come back often
Just
and appear on the
just invite
show.
us.
And I lay down some preconditions.
Next time you'll have coffee.
Yeah, so, well, I eat and drink like a Mormon, so I don't do caffeine. But I have water. I have Poland Spring. Anyway, thanks very, very much.
my pleasure.
And you both will get copies of my book, The Best of the Hudson Valley and Catskills. You don't need The Joy of Divorce. It looks like you're not going that route, so you get this. And thank you very much for joining me. Good night.
Welcome to the Dutchess County Fairgrounds in Rhinebeck, New York, and the annual giant flea market that takes place in April. Today is sunny and cool, just the kind of day to be out in the open air after a long winter. The vendors are here in great numbers, and there is something for everyone. It's not nearly as big an affair as the Dutchess County Fair, but it can be just as much fun. Leather goods, clothing, jewelry, toys, old and new, useful items and useless items, and like any flea market, one man's trash is another man's treasure. House was having an antique sale and auction in the Arts and Crafts building. Quitman House is a small museum of Rhinebeck history, located on Route 9 between Rhinebeck and Red Hook. This lady found a beautiful, although dated, mink hat in excellent condition, and she was thrilled.
Isn't that great?
Where did you get that?
I got it right over there from Hans at Quitman House.
Oh, really?
Yep. And when my daughter, when I'm dead, she'll wear it with a foot and with pride, because everything's in the detail in life.
This was just one of the many interesting events going on in and around Rhinebeck throughout the summer. Festivals, auto shows, and in late May, the old Rhinebeck Aerodrome north of town on Route 9 will open with more adventures of the Red Baron and Tess Truelove. And don't forget the Dutchess County Fair in late summer. Goodbye for now. See you around.